Let's say that we have a game where a character runs around and grabs ammunition which allows them to fire a projectile. As that character shoots the projectile, the number of ammo available gets depleted. And when the number of available ammunitions reaches 0, the character is no longer able to shoot that projectile and must collect more. In this video, we're going to cover all the steps to collect, use up, and display available ammunition in a 2D game. We're going to be building on some concepts that we have covered in previous videos, namely projectiles, UI, and pickups. Please check out these linked above. Be sure to like and subscribe. Let's jump into it. Let's say that we have a scene where we have a character that is able to run around and currently is able to shoot an unlimited amount of projectiles. But we want to change it so that when they run into these little guys here, they add to a certain amount of ammunition. And when those get used up, every time that we fire, the character needs to go and collect more. We're going to adapt some of this code that we have already, which I'll link below. So let's quickly look at this shoot projectile. This basic script has a reference to a game object which we will instantiate, and they get instantiated at this transform called shoot point, which we've added to our main character Bob. So no matter which way Bob faces, this shoot point is out in front. Again, if you need a reference to a video that I've made before, I'm going to link it in the description below. Cool. So we're going to take this script that we have, shoot projectile. I'm just going to copy it, all of it right now, and we're going to create a brand new script. And we're going to call this brand new script called shoot limited projectile. Double click on it to load my code editor. I'm going to paste all of this right now and just remove some of this fluff. I want to be sure that after I've adjusted some of these margins that I name this class to match the file name. Otherwise, I won't be able to drag it onto my object or use it in my scene. So now that I've named it correctly, I'm just going to drag it onto Bob just to make sure it works, and so that it appears here. We'll notice that in this code, we still have a public reference for a game object which we'll instantiate, a place for that object to instantiate, and then a key code enum, which is going to allow us to decide what button we're going to press to fire. So we said that we want to limit the amount of projectiles we can shoot. So what we're going to need is let's use in this case public int, and this is going to represent the number of projectiles we can fire. And this number is going to increase when we collect something and decrease when we fire. Normally we want to break up all of this code into smaller chunks so it's more manageable, but in this case we're just going to throw this all in for the sake of this video. So when we fire this projectile, we want to subtract from the number of projectiles that we have. But before we do that, we want to say that if the number of projectiles available is greater than 0, then we want to be able to fire. And once we've fired, we want to subtract 1. Subtract 1 from the number of available projectiles. So we'll say num projectiles minus minus. Great. So we'll be able to shoot if we have any available projectiles, and every time we shoot, we're going to subtract 1. Now we need to have some code that allows us to pick up a projectile. We said that these guys are going to be the objects that we run into, and that'll count as 1 projectile to be able to fire after we run into it. And on these objects, we have a box collider, and it's set to a trigger, and we have a collectible tag given to this object. So we can use that information to say that on trigger enter 2D, we can examine the object that has the collider on it and compare the tag to see if it belongs to a collectible. So if I spell collectible here, then when we run into an object we have to say if to create a conditional. If we run into an object with a collider that has a tag of collectible, then we want to increase the number of projectiles by 1. And we'll write this right here. Increase number of available projectiles by 1. Cool. Let's try that now. We ran into that, and we can check that script, and the number of projectiles is 1. So let's go and try to run up on another one and see if that goes to 2. Great. So now we have 2 projectiles, and I fired one, and let's see. I was able to fire, but that didn't subtract. I have my other projectile script enabled right now. I disabled it. Let's go back and try one more time. We increased by 1 here. So we have 1 projectile. Let's fire it, see if that goes to 0. Oh, I haven't set my shoot button. I'm going to change it to tab. I forgot a couple things. So we need to set some of these fields so that we know what projectiles we're going to be firing. I'm going to drag in this object here. And my shoot point is going to be the projectile spawn point, which is in front of Bob. Again, I got to set my tab button for my shoot. Let's try one more time. Okay, I've collected 1 projectile. I'm going to hit tab. And that went to 0. Now I'm going to try to hit tab and see if I can shoot again. And I'm hitting the button and nothing is happening. So we know now we were able to limit the number of projectiles I have. I have 1 here. But now we need to come up with a way to display how many we have on our UI. It might be handy to know how many we have so that we can be choosy in our game. And as a player, maybe you want to force them to make some good decisions and save the number of projectiles because maybe there aren't that many in this game. So how do we do that? We're going to go back into our code and we're going to set up a UI text, or let's use Text Mesh Pro. So we're going to use a TM Pro UI GUI element. I have a previous demo of this. Let's see. Let's go. We need to tell the code that we're going to be accessing some namespace, and so we're going to use the TM Pro here. And the object that we're using is TM Pro. Where are you, TM Pro? Text. And it's going to look like this. So we have a public TM Pro text object, and we'll just rename it to ammo text. Great. So we should have a field in this code that's going to represent a Text Mesh Pro UI element up here. So we'll go to our canvas, which already exists. If you haven't created one already, you can go to Create, Canvas, and then you can slap on a Text Mesh Pro text object. So we're going to add that here. I'm going to make sure that I drag it into my panel, and I'm going to call this ammo text. And I'm going to double click on it to find it where it exists on my canvas. Right now it's on my lower left hand corner. I'm just going to drag this up to my upper left over here. I might increase this just slightly. And I want to make sure that I have enough space so that I might say something like ammo colon, and maybe at any given time I won't have more than 2 digits of available ammo. Great. Going back to my object Bob, which holds this script. This script needs to know where this ammo text reference is. So I'll drag this into my TMP text field. Now the code knows where to send the text values. So the last part of this is every time that we collect or use up ammo, we want to update the number that we have here. So why don't we make a private void method that says update ammo text. And all this is going to do is update the text field inside, or the text property in the text object. So we're going to go here and text equals the number of projectiles that we have here. We can have it look like this. And of course, the number of projectiles is an integer, and this text field takes a string. You can see that here. And so we need to call the toString method so that it casts the numbers into something that the text parameter understands. We might want to also have some leader text so that we know this is going to throw the word ammo ahead of any numbers that we have, and that is going to help us see that in the UI. I think we're good to go now. So when we don't have anything grabbed yet, any ammo, it's just going to stay 0, 0. But I forgot to call this method. Let's grab this method and stick it in whenever we have a value change. We want to update the UI. We don't want to be necessarily calling it all the time. We're just going to call it whenever the number changes. So we have 1. Let's go and grab another one. 2. Let's go and fire. 1, 2. Now we're ammo 0. I'm going to try to hit the shoot button. There we go. So very simply, we can have the player know how many ammos we've collected and use them up. And that can be, very handy for the player, especially if you're limiting the number of how much ammo they can collect. And this number can be useful. Maybe let's try one more way of doing this. Maybe you don't want to represent this as numbers and you want to show it as maybe an image or a sprite of ammo. How do we do that? We have this text object here that represents our ammo. Let's go and make a area maybe right next to it, just so that we can keep these two things the same. I'm just going to show you an alternative. Let's go and make a panel, which I'm just going to put right below our ammo. And you can decide wherever you want to put it. I'm just creating a space so you can see what I'm trying to represent. I'm going to have a panel here, and on this panel, I'm going to put a layout, horizontal layout group. And what this does is it's going to allow me to organize some elements that may be similar or different. And so on this panel, I'm going to add some UI images, and those are going to represent the number of ammos that I've collected. And so this one's sort of floating on its own. I'm going to make this a child of the panel. Magically jumps over there because we have this layout element that's going to help us format and make sure that they're all organized. Now I'm just going to duplicate this 3 times. You can see that it's evenly spaced it out because I've set it so that it expands and aligns everything from the top left. And you can change these settings if you want to so that it spaces them evenly in that space. If I increase this to 4, let's see what happens. So I'm going to duplicate this last one more time. And maybe I want to set it so that I have 4 or 5 rounds of ammo at any given time, or I can expand this just a tad and just make it so I have 6. Let's say that I have 6. From there, I can have these images be images of my projectile. I'm going to go to my sprites wherever they are. I have this fireball. I'm going to drag these into my image image source or source image, and all of them have them there. So that's really handy. And right now I have all of them on there. We just need to change some of this code if we're going to be using this method rather than representing it in numbers. So let's take this and just adapt to it so you can comment out some of this code that you decide to use or not. And what I want to do now is, let's say that we have a grouping of image objects, right? This is a UI image. And so what I want to do is maybe I want to activate or deactivate these image objects. I don't want to, you can see that if I deactivate the object itself, then the layout group is going to shift things around. And I don't want things to be shifted around. So select this object again. I want to make sure it's activated. And all I really want to do is deactivate the image, and that space is still there. So maybe when I collect something, the first one lights up in left to right order, and when I fire one, then they decrease in right to left order. That could be nice, I think. So if I use one up, then this one disappears. If I fire another one, then this one should disappear then. So how do we do that? We need to first make an array. We could have another type of structure if we want to, but in this case we're going to use an array, and we'll call this, just make it public this time, and it's going to be a image. And since we're using images, we need to tell Unity that we're going to be using UI, and it's going to be an image array, and we're going to call these this a projectile array. Projectile images, let's call that. Great. And now we have a place to store a reference for these images. We'll go back to Bob, and we can see that there's a projectile images field here. And right now it's not set to anything because we didn't initialize it. What we can do is we can drag in all of these into that field. So I'm going to select Bob, lock this down so the inspector doesn't jump anywhere else. Select all of the images and drag them into here. If I hover right above the projectile images name rather than in spaces, sometimes it gets kind of quirky. I've seen better returns if just above the name. If I release, then they populate this array, and you can see that it goes in the order from top to bottom. That's nice. So remember, we want to be activating these images from left to right, which is in this top to bottom order, and when we deplete them, we want to start from bottom to top. Great. And so we can use this reference variable for projectile images when we start to enable things. So at the start of this thing, we want to make sure that our images are not visible. And so we can go at start to say that we want to disable all of these images. We want to start out so that they're not visible because we don't want to give our player the ability to fire 6 projectiles at start. It would be much more fun if we can make them collect stuff. So I'm going to get out of my lock, and I'm going to have all these images be not enabled. And just to make sure that they're not, I'm going to call let's say a for each loop, and we're going to say that for each var image in projectile images, that's the name of the array. For all of them, we're going to say that projectile image dot enabled equals false. I think that's right. So let's try that. Let's just enable all of these images, and if I hit start, they should be disabled. Great. And the object is still active, but the image component is disabled. Cool. So let's just put a comment code and say disable the projectile images UI. Great. So every time that we select or grab a new image, we want to enable each of these in order. And what's cool is we have this array, and so we can address them by index. Every time that we grab a new projectile, we can take the number of projectiles and enable it according to the array. So how do we do that? We're going to go, every time we select, we run into a pickup, this is where we'll enable the appropriate projectile image, UI image. So we're going to say, make reference to the array itself, projectile images. And we're going to say num projectiles after we've added it. And we're going to set enabled to be true. So when we start out in the scene, we don't have any enabled. So the first one we collect is going to be what? Is that going to be 1? Oh, okay. So we should set this -1. Let's do that. Num projectiles -1. And right now they're all disabled. If I collect one, then the first one gets enabled. Second one, boom, it's great. It seems to be working. Let's do the third one. Can I get up there? Nope. Okay, that's fine. I have 3. If I fire 1, 2, 3, these don't disappear yet. Why? Because we haven't called the code to be disabled yet. So let's just copy this and do this in reverse. Every time we fire now, we're going to disable the last fired UI projectile image. And how do we do that? Instead of being enabled, then we're going to set this to be false. And when do we want this? Maybe we can do this right at, is it the one that we just fired? Nums -1, 0 -1. No, I think that this math is a little bit off when we subtract. So let's just do this one above this line. Let's see if this works. Delete that. Cool. Because this number changes after we do this math right here. So we'll select, grab 1, fire. That disappeared. And let's go and grab a second one. Great. So it's going to be up to you how you set this. I suggest that you also put a limit on how many you can collect. So you should create a variable that is public int projectile or max projectiles, and this is going to represent how many you could possibly collect at any given time. So I have 6 slots of these. I should set this value to be 6. Max projectile should be 6. And I'm going to come back into this code so that when I collect something, this is where I collect something, and I'll say if I ran into an object and it's collectible, then after I've collected it, then, or I can set this here, and num projectiles isn't greater than, is less than max projectiles. So if I have 5 if it's equal or less than max projectiles. Swap this order here. If I have 5 projectiles, I can still collect one. If I have 6 projectiles, I should not be able to collect one. If I have 6, I shouldn't be able to collect some. Yep. Great. So we should just use less than. Let's try that. 1, 2. Let's go and make some more projectile ammos. Made a whole bunch. I'm just going to move them around a little bit. Oh, they're all up there. Let me jump out of this. Let's make it easier on ourselves. Let's go to this guy and duplicate that one a few times. Okay. Should be able to collect 6 now. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Let's see if I can get to the top. Nope. Okay. I can use them all up. Let's try one more time and let's make a 7th one available. And then I think that we can wrap this video up. I think this is all working. Next video that we're going to talk about is maybe having the ability that cools down. Okay, so there's 6, and I'm going to run on to this guy, and let's look at Bob, because this shows us how many projectiles we have right now. We've collected 6, and the max is 6. What if I run into this other extra one? This number doesn't change because we've hit our limit. Excellent. Great. I hope that you found this video helpful. Please like and subscribe. I'm going to show the next video is likely going to be one that represents a cooldown, or we're having a UI that has like a sort of a clockish type of face that becomes opaque or clear, representing how much time we have left to use an ability or something like that. Cool. I'll see you guys later.